Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Thomas, for those kind words. I always get in trouble when I start naming names, but some of my colleagues, former colleagues, are with me today. I miss them. In no particular order, Ron Henson is here, and Jason Redmond, and Jim Napper, and I don't think I left anybody out. What I thought I'd do today is talk to you for a few minutes about what's happened in the last 19 months with this Congress. But first, let me tell you what the United States Senate is like. A banker was talking to an oil man one day, and the banker turned to the oil man and he said, "You know, we loaned you $10 million to rework all of your old wells and they went dry." And the oil man said, "Yep, could have been worse." And then the banker said, "We loaned you a second $10 million to drill new wells and they all went dry." And the banker said, or the oil man said, "Yep, could have been worse though." And then the banker said, "Then we loaned you a third tranche, $10 million, to buy new drilling equipment and it all broke down." And the oil man said, "Yep, could have been worse." Now the banker at this point is aggravated. He said, "We loaned you $30 million and it's all gone. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? All you can say is it could have been worse." And the oil man said, "Yeah, it could have been my own money." And that's kind of how the United States Congress works. Washington's compared. Sometimes it's said that D.C. and the Congress spins like a drunken sailor, and that's not true because a drunken sailor stops when he runs out of money. We just keep borrowing. I think we have had, though. Well, let me first say this about the Senate. We're together a lot. You get to know very quickly all of your colleagues. You're together so much on the Senate floor and in committee. It's probably a lot like you would expect. There are a couple of jerks, but not as many as you would think. There are some folks in the Senate who think they're one of the founding fathers. I mean, their ego wouldn't fit in this room. About 40% of them, maybe more, think they ought to be president. And the scary thought is most of them think they're qualified. But by and large, they're good and decent people. Now, we have some very bitter disagreements, but sometimes reasonable people disagree over tough issues. And I always try to look at both sides of an issue. I do think we have, despite the partisanship in Washington, I do think we've had a pretty solid 19 months. And I thought I would just mention a couple of things and then take questions about what I'm talking about or anything you want to talk about. We started with a tax cut, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And I think any fair-minded person would have to say that it's worked. Last quarter, we got in quarterly GDP numbers. We grew our economy about 4.1% on an annualized basis. That's the best we've done in a long time. Since we passed the tax bill, we've created about 1.2 million new jobs. Actually, we've created about 4 million since President Trump became president. So far, about $1 billion in profits owned by American companies that were parked overseas for tax reasons have been repatriated back into the United States. That's helped immensely in terms of investment. I did some figures on the back of an envelope the other day. Our wages, on average, are up 2.7% over this time last year. This is a double-edged sword, but I suspect they're going to go up more. That's tough on bottom lines for some businesses, but on the other hand, it means that our economy's hitting on all 8 cylinders. The average taxpayer couple, now this is an average, this year will have about $2,917 a year extra to pay. We didn't get a single Democratic vote. And I'll tell you why. Most of my Democratic colleagues supported the individual tax cuts, but they didn't support the tax cuts for business. In fact, they wanted us to raise taxes on business. I would not vote for that under any circumstances. I felt like the reason our economy was depressed was in part due to the fact that our businesswomen and businessmen were not investing their profits in new plants, new machinery, new equipment, and new software. It didn't make sense to me that if we added additional taxes on business, that would incent those business people. You know, taxes are just the cost of doing business, just like utilities, just like labor, just like insurance. So if you raise taxes, you've raised costs. And it never made sense to me that we could encourage business people to invest and create more jobs by raising their costs. Unless you were playing Frisbee in the quad during Econ 101, you know that when you tax something, you get less of it. And I think it turned out that we were right. You can't be for taxes if you're against business. Or you can't be for business, for jobs if you're against business. I can tell you, you'll never find a politician who will say anything but I'm for jobs. But you can't be for jobs if you're against business. And it's been my experience that businesswomen and businessmen need 4 things from government. They need low taxes, they need reasonable regulations, they need a decent infrastructure, they need a skilled workforce, and then they need the government to get the hell out of the way and let the free market system work. And I thank you. And I think we're off to a good start in terms of getting our economy back where it ought to be. Let me mention regulation. When this Congress began and this president took over, we were looking at an additional $122 billion of new regulations that had been imposed in the prior administration. And if you look at the number of rules and regulations we have, it's really breathtaking. We have when we took over, we had 185,000 pages. 185,000 pages of rules and regulations. You could stand on the thing and paint the ceiling. It would take you 3 years to just read them one time. The total cost of compliance with all those rules and regulations, I kid you not, is about $1.86 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars a year. And most of those costs are passed on. We've tried to do something about it. The Senate itself has passed, and the House, which went along with us, we have passed what we call 15 CRAs. This is where we target a particular rule and regulation and get rid of it. That's saved, by my numbers, about $40 billion. President Trump has adopted a one-in, two-out policy. When the bureaucracy comes to him and wants a new regulation, the bureaucracy of the agency, as the case may be, has to identify 2 regulations that it's going to get rid of. That's why we call it one-in, two-out. The administration has eliminated actually 22 rules and regulations for every new one. Through the one-in, two-out policy, he's killed about The administration has killed about 860 rules and regulations. I figure that we have saved, this is a rough number, but about $100 billion in 17 months. What you find out very quickly in Washington is that there is a fourth branch of government, and it's the bureaucracy. And it possesses powers that were once only possessed by kings or queens. It's really a gigantic rogue beast. You have unelected bureaucrats, and I don't mean that altogether in a pejorative sense. Some of these are very capable men and women, but they are unelected. You have these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of unelected bureaucrats. They make their own laws, called rules and regulations. They interpret their own laws. They enforce their own laws in their own courts in front of judges that they appoint. And they can do pretty much anything they want to. And they have a huge impact on the free enterprise system. I'll give you a good example of a regulatory relief bill that we passed. I sit on the banking committee. We passed all of our bills. They give them these names like you're going to remember them. The Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act. I was a co-sponsor. Basically, we just roll back a lot of the rules and regulations on community banks from Dodd-Frank. Chairman Yellen, then Chairwoman Yellen, the head of the Federal Reserve, came and talked with us in banking one day, and it was my turn to question her, and I said, Madam Chairperson, what did the community banks do to cause the meltdown in 2008? She said, nothing. I said, well, then why are you trying to regulate them half to death? And she said, I want to come by and talk to you. She didn't want to say anything in a public meeting. She came by and talked to me later, and she said we went too far. So we fixed that. And now, unless you're a $250 billion bank, if you are, then you are regulated very, very, very carefully. In fact, all of the banks are regulated carefully. But you're specifically regulated if you're a $250 billion or bigger bank, because I still happen to believe that we have banks that are still too big to fail, and they need to be carefully regulated. We don't need a repeat of 2008, but the community banks are not included in that, and they shouldn't be, and they were swept up. And I think it's helped immensely. We've spent a lot of time on the judiciary. The Senate, of course, has to confirm the president's nominees. At this point, we've confirmed 24 judges to the United States Courts of Appeals, 26 district court judges, 1 associate Supreme Court justice, Justice Neil Gorsuch, and when I get back, probably about the first week of September, we're going to start hearing confirmation proceedings on Judge Kavanaugh, who, as you know, has been nominated to an associate position on the Supreme Court. I can tell you what I'm looking for in terms of a judge. I want somebody who is whip smart, somebody who has a judicial temperament, and somebody who understands the role of the judiciary in our Madisonian system of separation in powers. I'm not looking for an ideologue. I don't want a hater. If you want to be an ideologue, if you want to rewrite the Constitution every other Thursday, then you need to go run for Congress or run for president and have at it. But the Bill of Rights is not an a la carte menu. And you can't pick and choose. And you can't change the order. I'm looking for a man or a woman who will call the balls and strikes. And that's the litmus test that I use in picking judges. I'll mention a couple of other things. We passed, didn't get a lot of public reaction, but it was an important bill. We expanded our veterans' rights further. Now, if you're a veteran and you don't get the service that you need from your veterans hospital, you can go to any physician you want to, and we'll pick up the tab. That's the least we can do do for the men and women that served our country. We just passed a farm bill. The House passed one version, the Senate passed another version. It's in conference. There'll be a big fight. The farm bill is about $860 billion spread over 10 years. 70% of that is food stamps. And we will ultimately have a fight over implementing a work requirement for food stamps. I'm pushing that very hard. I offered an amendment, Ted Cruz and I did, on the Senate floor. We lost. We'll be offering it again. We have, by my calculations, about, 21 million maybe people on food stamps who are between the ages of 18 and 59, who are not disabled, and who have children younger than 6. I don't want to take food stamps away from people in need. I do not. I do want fewer people to need food stamps. And the new rule, if we can pass it, is, look, if you're between the ages of 18 and 59, if you're not disabled, and you don't have a child under 6, so I'm not talking about a mother with a sick child in her arms, I'm not talking about getting grandpa out of the nursing home. If you're in that narrow class of people, and it's not really narrow, it's millions, then we will gladly, happily give you food stamps because we're a compassionate people. But in return, you've got to work 20 hours a week or go to job training. And we have put money in the bill to basically set up workforce development centers. Kentucky's done a great job with theirs. It's called Kentucky Works. They will help you get a job because a lot of people don't know how to do it, and we want to help them. Now, there are some people, I want to believe it's a minority of people who are gaming the system, who could work but choose not to. And I think our response to them ought to be gently, the best way to get back on your feet sometimes is to get up off your butt. And if you want food stamps and you're able to work, you're going to have to work. I'll hit a lick on our international situation. 2 years ago, Xi Jinping in China, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, the Ayatollah in Iran, and Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation were making the rules. We were dancing to their tune. Ours is the most powerful country in all of human history, but we weren't respected. And I think that has changed. You can draw your own conclusions. This is America. You're entitled to believe what you want about the president's management style. It's unconventional. I've suggested to him before that tweaking less would not cause brain damage. But he hasn't taken my advice, and I don't expect him to. So, like him or dislike him, if you measure him by results, for 25 years, we've been trying to get our allies in NATO to pay their fair share. America's put up 70% of the money, twice what France has been putting up, 3 times what Germany has been putting up. And NATO, wonderful organization. I would never do anything to hurt NATO, and I don't think Trump would either. But they got to pay their fair share. And now they're starting to do it. Sometimes to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. Of course, you don't want to break all the eggs and kill the chicken and shoot the rooster, but I'm not suggesting that. But for the first time, our allies in NATO are starting to pay their fair share. I think for the first time, many countries respect the United States again. Assad is a butcher. He's a butcher of his own people. The last administration told him if he used chemical weapons, there was a line in the sand. He used chemical weapons, we did nothing. This time he used chemical weapons. The Trump administration called Putin, said, I'm about to knock the hell out of him, and then the president knocked the hell out of him. Assad did it again, and he hit him twice as hard. And he hadn't done it a third time. Iran, let me tell you something. We made a deal with Iran, which means we just postponed them getting a nuclear weapon for 10 years, and we gave them $100 billion. You know what Iran did with that money? They exported terrorism. They started a war in Yemen. They jumped in the middle of Syria. They've established a foothold in Iraq. They funded Hezbollah in Lebanon. And if they try to establish a foothold in South Syria, I can tell you we're going to have a war because Israel's not going to put up with it. These sanctions are one of the best things that I think this administration has done because Iran is either going to change its behavior or we will have the ability to put them to their knees economically. I hate to do it to the Iranian people, but the Ayatollah is a hater. I don't think he represents most Muslims in this world, but I do know this. His branch of his religion, if your religion teaches you to hate somebody or kill them, it's time to get a new religion. I'm optimistic for our country. I'm optimistic for our state. I wish our economy was better. We're lagging. Our private sector job growth last month was 0.7%, or last year was 0.7%. We're behind. National average is 1.6. Part of the problem is that our labor force participation rate is so low. We've got a lot of folks who could work who aren't. We rank 6th from the bottom in terms of labor force participation, and that's not a list you want to be at the bottom of. Despite that, I constantly remind myself, maybe it'll mean something to you, that the future is just a bunch of things we do right now strung together. That's all it is. And I don't think Louisiana or this country, I don't think we ought to fear our future. I think we ought to grasp for it. I do. We ought to stop listening to the naysayers who say, well, it's not done that way. Well, maybe it's not, but maybe it should be. We have to stop listening to the naysayers who say you're taking too big a chance. Well, maybe we are. Maybe we'll win. I think this state and this country are worth fighting for. I love them both, and I know you do too. We're not going to win every fight, folks. We live in a real world. But by God, we ought to refuse to be beaten. And I hope you'll leave this gathering today as optimistic about our state and our country as I am. Thank you again for having me. I did better than I thought I could do. Let me answer questions if that's okay. Is that all right?
Quick question.
Sure.
What's the tone of the Senate with regards to all the trade tariffs that the administration is putting in place?
Wait and see. I don't believe personally that I think the president's too smart to get us into a trade war. The only way to win a trade war is don't fight it. I mean, it's kind of like fighting with your spouse. You can win, but the casualties are so high, I don't think the president intends to get in a trade war, but I think he is going to try to renegotiate the trade deals. The real problem is China. I think we got China into the WTO on January 1, 2001. On January 2, China started cheating. And they steal our intellectual property, and they subsidize industry so they can compete illegitimately, and I think they're the real problem. I will tell you that if we do get into a full-fledged trade war, I think Congress will step in. Now, what we'll do, I'm not part of management in Congress. I work for labor. I can't predict what they'll do, but I think Congress will If as a result of these tariffs, you start seeing prices at Walmart go up 20% and prices at Dollar General go up 20%, I think you'll see Congress react. The next step on the horizon is our renegotiated NAFTA, and I'm anxious to see what the President and Mr. Lighthizer come up with there. I think we'll know in 60 days. What else? Yes, sir.
People might be seeing things in the different news things about this deep state.
Hmm?
And also you hear about this fella named George Soros and the world order.
Uh-huh.
Could you comment on your view of those two concepts?
Well, I don't know Mr. Soros. He's rich. I know that. You don't, it reminds me what old buddy of mine in high school used to tell me. He said, Kennedy, to be happy, you don't have to be rich and famous. You just got to be rich. So I can't comment on Mr. Soros. I just know he's got plenty of money. In terms of the deep state, I'll tell you what I think of the deep state as. It's conventional Washington. It's the people who've been there forever. The per capita income of Washington, D.C. is the highest in the country. It's higher than, I don't know if it's highest in the country, it's high as Manhattan, but it's higher than Silicon Valley. And you have all these people that make gobs of money off the status quo. And these are the so-called cultured, cosmopolitan, I know everything crowd. I call them the bacon-wrapped shrimp crowd. They live in the condos with the high ceilings and the important art on the walls. And all they're interested in, the status quo. I'm interested. I think our economy I think there are many Americans who are left out of this economy, left out of this country, economically, spiritually, culturally. And those are the people I try to work hard for every day. And they're angry. They're angry on the right and they're angry on the left. And I hear it every day. They say, Kennedy, let me tell you what's wrong with America. I look around, I see too many undeserving people at the top cutting corners and getting bailouts. And they say, Kennedy, I see too many undeserving, not everybody, but undeserving people at the bottom getting handouts. And I'm in the middle. And I get stuck with the bill. And I can't pay it anymore because my income hadn't gone up. But I tell you what has gone up. My health insurance has gone up. My state taxes have gone up. My kids' tuition has gone up. And I'm the person who gets up every day and goes to work and obeys the law and pays his taxes and tries to do the right thing by his kids. And they're angry. Now you can either ride the anger or try to solve it. And I'm trying to solve it. The deep state, so to speak, they just love the status quo because they're making. I went to a function the other night. I don't go out much at night. I don't, I don't know why I'm made this way, but, for me, happy hour is a nap. I was born to be wild, but only until about 9 o'clock at night, I go home and I have to keep up with the reading. But I went to a function the other night and all the mob families were there. You had the corporate types were there. You had the lobbyists were there. You had the politicians there. You had the former politicians or lobbyists were there. And I guarantee you, every one of them wants the status quo. And we're losing America. And people feel disconnected. And we got to do something about it. What else?
Over here, Senator.
Yeah, Ben. Oh, let me get John, then I'll get you. Yeah, John.
This might be a loaded question, but tell us what you think about how well John Bell is leading our state. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I've known Governor Edwards for a long time. I like him. I think he's very smart. Now, we have some fundamental disagreements. The latest topic we're discussing is his prison reform program. He calls it prison reform. I call it prison release. I think the governor is is focused on how many prisoners we have. I'm more focused on how many people we have committing crime. So we disagree over that. I guess generally speaking, as long as I've known John Bell, he honestly believes that government can spend the money you earn better than you can. I don't. I think people can spend the money they earn better than government can. I think the governor honestly believes he can tax us into prosperity. I've never seen a society do that. Not a capitalist society. I think the governor believes in more freedom, or more free stuff. I believe in more freedom. I think we've got too much government. In fact, I think so many folks in our country, particularly young people, have grown up with so much government they don't know what it's like to be free. So he and I have a fundamental disagreement. John Bell's a liberal Democrat, and I'm not. This is America. You can believe what you want, and I respect his opinion. If he were right, I'd agree with him. But he's not.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am. I'm told one more.
Senator.
Yes.
You had a lot of national attention after you grilled a nominee for judge. And one of the things some of my colleagues in Washington were saying was that, who is this Senator Kennedy who has this country way about it? I think you revealed that you were more than just a country lawyer when you grilled him on those questions. So my question to you, though, is were you surprised how unprepared a nominee was?
Yeah, I was. I was disappointed. Look, I've had to learn a lot, still learning, but you come off the Senate floor out of a committee and there are never less than 50 reporters and cameras. Some of my colleagues just ignore them. I was taught not to do that. I was taught they're going to write the story, so you might as well get in your licks. And the press has a job to do. Sure, they make me mad sometimes. They make me mad as a mama wasp sometimes, but they got a job to do. I think some of them don't know what to make of me because I answer their questions. Now, in terms of the gentleman you're talking about, he wasn't qualified to be a federal judge. And just because you've seen My Cousin Vinny doesn't mean you can be a federal judge. He's a smart guy, but I hammered him pretty good, and they pulled his nomination down, and they should have. The White House made a mistake. I will tell you, I flew home. That happened on a Thursday. I flew home Thursday night. I was in New Orleans Friday morning, and driving back, Ross was driving. I was reading, and the phone rings. Cell phone rings, unknown caller. I said, I better take this one. Get on the phone. This is the White House, hold for the president. I said, oh, God. I am going to get my elbow chewed out here. And he came on and he said, Kennedy. I said, yes, sir, Mr. President. He said, I just saw your video. I said, yes, sir, Mr. President. He said, Kennedy, this guy's terrible. He said, what? Did I interview this guy? I said, no, sir, you didn't. Your staff did. He said, well, I'm pulling this guy down. No offense. And he called somebody in the room and he said, so-and-so, come in here. Pull that guy down. Tell him to come back in 5 years after he learns how to practice law. And I appreciated that. And he came back on and he said, look, do your job, man. Do your job. And I really appreciated that. I will say this about the president, and I know people either like him or hate him. I don't have anything to compare it to, but he's very accessible. I don't call him every week or every 2 weeks, but when I call him, he calls back. And that's unusual. Listen, thank you. I went over, and thank you. It's an honor to represent you.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.